Hi guys, and welcome to episode 1 of my Summer of Sega. And today I wanted just to talk to you a little bit about why I'm doing a Summer of Sega and sort of start at the beginning and give you my experiences with the Sega Genesis to start things off. To begin, I'm doing a Summer of Sega because for some reason Sega was a company that always just kind of fell by the wayside. Not that I didn't like Sega or had a specific reason to avoid Sega consoles, it was just sort of circumstance that I never got into Sega. I grew up as a very Mac and PC gamer guy and didn't get into consoles at all until the original PlayStation. So anything I had before then, I really didn't touch very much. And from then on, with the Saturn and the Dreamcast, it was just something where I had so many PlayStation games and getting into Nintendo consoles and even Xbox that I just had so many games it didn't feel worth it buying another console most of the time, or the circumstance of timing where if I get my hands on a Sega console, it was always several years after their prime, so I really didn't have a lot of access to games. And getting into purchasing games that were sort of retro at the time wasn't really an option because I grew up in a household that if something was made past 1980, my parents pretty much didn't get it technologically. When we got our first actual up-to-date PC, it was because I bought it. When we got consoles, it was because either my sister got one or I got one. We didn't get the internet until the early 2000s when I was in high school. I mean, it was something where I didn't really have the option of things like online retailers or eBay or Amazon. And in my area, within pretty much a 20-mile radius of my hometown, there was only one retro video game store, and I didn't know it existed. It was sort of on the other side of the closest city to me. It was a place I never really got to. So growing up, really until I moved out of the house and got into my 20s, I kind of had almost no access to retro gaming. If something was more than a few years out of date, it was you find it at a yard sale or Goodwill, otherwise you don't get it. And because I was always sort of behind the times on Sega consoles, I never really got into Sega. Like I said, wasn't purposeful, just the way it happened, up until about 2 years ago. To start, I originally got my first Sega console, the Sega Genesis, a Model 2, at a yard sale. This was the second home console I ever owned after the NES, but like I said, wasn't really into consoles, only had a handful of NES games, and when I got my Genesis, it was not anywhere near the time it first came out. It was actually in the mid-90s, only a little bit before the PS1 launched, and it happened to be a yard sale find over the summer, just with a handful of games. And like I said before, didn't have any access to finding any other games, so the only Genesis games I had, up until a few years ago, honestly, was just those first games I got at a yard sale. That was it. The first games that I got, though, were, luckily really good games. So I had a good Genesis experience. It was just sort of behind the times for me and where I was with my PC gaming, so I never really got into it more. But luckily, when I did get my system at that yard sale, I picked up Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic 3, Shining Force 1 and 2, The Last Battle, although my original copy was just the cart, it wasn't complete in box like this one I have now, and the last game, Phantasy Star 4, which I no longer have my old copy, so if I do want to play it, I just play so far the Sega Genesis collection on the PS2. I am looking to get a box copy of that, and hopefully a box copy of the Mega Drive version, the Japanese version. And like I said, I did have a very good experience with the Genesis, being something that was, again, several years sort of out of date from what I was playing and didn't really have a lot of experience. I did like Sonic. I was terrible at Sonic. I've always been and still am fairly bad at platformers from sort of the Gen 3, Gen 4 generation. Just for some reason, I don't know why, that they just don't click with me. I like them, but I'm really bad. So I did like those. The Last Battle I really did enjoy and still enjoy it today. A very, very difficult game, but once you start memorizing some of the patterns, at least the first few levels really aren't that bad. It is just a Americanized port of a Japanese game from a popular anime series, and they did edit it over here, taking out the blood and a lot of sort of the anime references, so it's kind of has almost no connection to it any longer. But it is a very fun game, which really, really shows the power of the parallax scrolling for the Genesis and really giant sprites. So it's really an impressive game that I feel with a lot of these, I didn't appreciate them at the time because I didn't have them within the context of really understanding where console gaming was at the time, being someone who wasn't experienced when I was young with consoles. I liked Shining Force 1 and 2. Shining Force 2, for me, was sort of the clearly superior game. It was sort of a big leap in the storytelling between the two. Gameplay-wise, there really weren't too many huge differences, and they're both very enjoyable. And I actually, for some reason, even though they're a little simpler, enjoyed a lot of the combat sequences in the first Shining Force a little bit better. But Shining Force 2 told a deeper story. It was just sort of written better and presented better overall in Shining Force 2. Really enjoyed them. Great tactical RPGs for the Sega Genesis. And sadly, the game that I don't have a physical copy of anymore was my favorite game to play at the time, Phantasy Star 4. I really, really enjoyed it. I was playing it at a time when the only other console RPGs I had played were the original Final Fantasy, and then being able to play Final Fantasy 4 and 6 and a little bit of Chrono Trigger at sort of a friend's house. But as far as games that I owned for consoles, this was sort of up there with the original Final Fantasy as the only big console RPGs. And to this day, it's still my favorite Sega Genesis game. I have not had a chance to play Phantasy Star 2 or 3 yet, and I have not had a chance to play the original Phantasy Star because I'm kind of holding off until I get a Master System, because I want my first experience with the first Phantasy Star to actually be on the Master System. So even though it's in some compilations and you could obviously, play it through an emulator or whatever, I'm sort of avoiding that experience until I get my hands on a Master System. Now, in one of next week's videos, I'll go into talking a little bit more with my experience with the Sega Saturn, and then after that talking about and sort of ending with the Dreamcast. But I'll kind of skip those for now and go on to just a few years ago. After I got married, my wife had much more experience with the Sega Genesis, and for her, most of hers was with the Model 1 Sega Genesis. This is what is nostalgic for her. And she really, really, really liked Sega. She really liked Sonic, and she's sort of the one who got me to finally sort of look more into Sega as a franchise. Like I said, even over the years, as I did have more access to sort of online ways of purchasing games or learning about games, more retro stores in the area, I still never really got much into Sega simply because of the sheer amount of other consoles and other games that I was playing. It just never sort of came to the forefront. And even there was more competition over the years as I learned more about things like some of the Japan-only Bandai systems, or watching a lot of the early videos years ago, the Happy Console Gamer, and later on Playongo, and getting into a lot of NEC stuff, being someone who's really, really interested in learning a lot about the PC Engine and the PCFX, and I've been collecting some PC Engine CD games and just really enjoying that. So that kind of, again, interfered a little bit with my interest in learning more about what was actually on Sega consoles beyond what I originally owned. But eventually we got a Model 1 and a Model 2 Genesis, and I started picking up more Genesis games and really enjoying them, and I have now about 3 times what I originally owned, so it's really a fun system that I'm really enjoying, and it's one of my favorites from that generation, and I'm going to enjoy it even more now that a few weeks ago I picked up another Model 2 with a Model 2 Sega CD, and we got a great deal because it was technically broken, but thankfully there was nothing seriously wrong with it. I just needed to replace a fuse that had burned out inside the Sega CD. Did that one afternoon, and it was up and running perfectly, so got a great deal on a Sega CD, and I'm really going to enjoy that, I think, almost as much as the cartridge games themselves, and more because it's something that gets a really bad rap, the Sega CD. The North American library really isn't that great, but it's given a lot more flack than it deserves because a lot of the FMV games are really pushed for it, and people don't realize there are a lot of really good RPGs and more serious games on the Sega CD. And then if you get into the Mega CD, the Japanese version, there are so many incredible games over there that we never got for the Sega CD. It was something that was really, really pushed more in Japan to compete with the PC Engine. And it's something I'll get into a little bit later. I'm going to be doing a history of Sega video, so I'll talk a little bit more about that specifically. But just getting into my own personal experience, I've really enjoyed picking up some Sega CD games. we got a bunch of games for free with that non-working Sega CD because, according to the seller, none of the games worked and the Sega CD itself didn't work. All I had to do was replace it with like a less than $2 fuse and the Sega CD worked. And so far, every single one of the games we picked up also works. We got Lethal Enforcers, so that's a good one there. Sewer Shark, yeah, it's Sewer Shark. We got Echo the Dolphin, The Tides of Time, Tomcat Alley, a horrible Bill Walsh football game, but hey, it's free and at least 2 good games out of the bunch. I picked up a Power Rangers game. We got Heimdall. This is in a nice plastic case, so it's a little shiny there. This is a lot of fun so far. And we picked up Crime Patrol, and I also just got, a few days ago, a light gun, so I can use for Crime Patrol there. A lot of fun, an FMV shooter. And an example of one of those FMVs that it's so bad that it's good. It's not horrible to the point where it's unenjoyable. It's horrible to the point where it's just sort of funny and entertaining. And the best game so far that I have for the Sega CD is definitely Rise of the Dragon. I've been having a lot of fun with that, and I'm going to get a little bit more into some Sega CD reviews later, so I don't want to spoil a lot for this one, but I mean, if you've played it, you know it's awesome. It's something that's sort of in the vein of Snatcher, if you know what that is. That's one I would love to get for Sega CD, but not for hundreds of dollars, thank you. So that is sort of my overall experience so far with the Sega Genesis, and it kind of represents what I want to accomplish here this summer. I am really, over the past 2 years, have been getting very passionately into Sega stuff to the point where I've kind of really toned down my looking and searching and buying of stuff for other consoles because I'm having so much fun getting things for the Genesis and the Saturn and the Dreamcast, and just really enjoying it and falling in love with the whole culture around Sega to the point where it's become one of, if not my favorite companies as far as like console manufacturers, and I really just enjoy the culture of Sega up until the end of the Dreamcast. We'll talk about that later. But really enjoying Sega, really enjoying getting a lot of amazing titles, and I've been importing a lot too for the Saturn and the Dreamcast, so I've been able to experience games from sort of a wide berth, and it's something where it's some of my first Japan-only consoles, and it's getting a lot more Japan-only releases for those systems. So I'm really enjoying Sega, and I thought this was a unique opportunity not just to show you something that I'm very passionate about, show you something that I really love and something that I'm really enjoying, but to show it to you as I'm enjoying it. Showing you a lot of games that I just got recently, games that I'm playing for the first time, games that I'm completing for the first time. I can sort of, instead of just reminiscing about a game I really enjoyed like 10 years ago, I can share the experience of enjoying it for the first time with you. And I feel like that's going to be something that's more interesting for you as a viewer and more fun for me as a content creator. It's something that there's going to be a lot of unexpected things. I've been getting games that I've just know very little about, just sort of like quick clips or online or like reading text and enjoying them for the first time. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited for this whole Summer of Sega thing. I have a lot of ideas, almost too many things. I mean, it sounds crazy. I'm filling an entire summer with Sega, but there's almost too much content. I'm going to be doing a whole lot here. Some of them are going to be sort of like 3 reviews in like one episode, some quick reviews, and then longer reviews in a full episode. And I have tons of really cool like memorabilia. I've really heavily in the past less than 2 years gotten into Sega, and I'm really enjoying it. And I hope you guys are going to enjoy the ride this summer as well. And I hope to see you next time.